All right, welcome back to Conscious Construction, the Conscious Enneagram podcast. I'm Abby Robbins, and today I am joined with Elizabeth Chapin.
Hi.
Hi.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, of course. So in this season of the podcast, we're talking all about the Enneagram and spirituality. And so we have you on as a 4 to kind of guide us in what it looks like to have a spiritual experience as a 4. So let's start off with some. Like definition of terms. Like what does spirituality mean to you? Like when someone, because it's a loaded term, right?
Yeah, I think it's something that I can answer differently probably every day. I think spirituality is an interesting word because it encapsulates so many things.
Yeah.
It's almost like a safe word these days.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like it just, you can just like use it and not get in trouble with it because people are like, oh, sure.
It means whatever
you need it to mean.
Exactly.
Right.
It's very flexible.
It's very flexible. But I guess for me right now, it means seeing the whole network of things, of like seeing that I'm not the center of consciousness and that there isn't a center of consciousness.
Yeah.
And that God even is not a center of consciousness, that there is just no center of consciousness and it's all interconnected. I think I'm almost an animist these days where I just feel like everything is sentient or at least sacred.
Yeah.
And the more I try to live into that space, the more I feel less like I'm trying to insert myself in it or who I am even. And I'm finding it helpful.
Yeah. Okay, so you said that you're more of an animist these days. I mean, I love that. And I love this description that you've given us for like what spirituality means to you. I mean, I could go in so many different directions. But I'm curious, what was it? What's your journey? Like, how did you get to this place?
I'm from Mississippi and I grew up in a Christian family and a Christian culture. And I think Christianity in Mississippi is it's like a fish swimming in water. And so it's really what you know and all you know.
Yeah.
And it's also like socially really important and status very important. So even if you weren't interested in the spirituality of Christianity, it's just like the club you're in. And so you can almost like just float around and not even, I feel like I heard so much language growing up about like your personal savior and your personal God and finding your personal God. And I think I was always wanting that. Like, what is my personal God?
I do want that.
How is Jesus my personal savior? But I always felt like I was this little girl, like longing for, there I am with longing, the little girl longing for something, right? And I think, honestly, it's pretty recently that that kind of whole like dropping out of that space and like realizing that I'm in part of this whole flow, this whole web that even the act of longing is assuming that I'm here and sacredness is somewhere else that I need to find instead of just relinquishing into it, surrendering into it. And it's funny, like I feel like away from Christianity I can actually see some of their principles making sense to me outside of it, if that makes sense. Like the meek shall inherit the earth. That that struck me the other day. I was driving around. I'm like, because in trying to not be the center of consciousness, in trying to just be unspecial.
Yeah.
I can start to see how letting go of myself and my ego and my desires can be that, like it's a space, that meekness space, which Anyway.
Wow.
But it's been I've always been religious person since I was a child. Like super religious.
Okay.
Super into it. Like,
okay. Yeah, like this was your vibe. You were into this piece of it.
Super into it. And I think I'm just, I guess I feel maybe for the first time in my life that I belong by almost not belonging, if that makes sense. I don't know if that makes sense, but not inserting myself in the belonging. There's like a deeper belonging, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it's like you're not having to force it.
Yeah, I'm not having to find it. I'm not having to look for it.
Or like create it or manufacture it.
Or fix it. Or
it's just
define it even.
There.
Yeah.
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 Well, I feel like we didn't say this, but you've already said it in so many ways that you identify with type 4 on the Enneagram.
Type 4.
Yeah.
Sexual. Yes. And I have been kind of I was telling you before this that I'm in kind of a weird space.
No, the Enneagram. It puts you in a weird space real fast.
Yes. I'm so grateful for it. And also I am frustrated with the culture of it right now, I suppose. So
join the club.
Yeah. So on I have a lot of things to say about that. So like on one hand, I feel like when I meditate and I've learning how to separate my thoughts and feelings from myself, or like realize that I'm having them, that they aren't me. What the Enneagram does for me in that moment is it allows me to say, oh, there you go again, trying to be special. Oh, there you go again, trying to, having envy. Oh, there you go again with your shame. It allows me to sort of see what my thoughts tend to be.
Yeah.
And then go, look how much time you spend thinking thoughts like that. And so it allows me to kind of work with that, I think, a little more easily, or like see it, or identify it a little more easily if I didn't know anything about the Enneagram.
Yeah.
So I think it adds a layer to my meditation practice that's super helpful.
Yeah.
That said, that's like, I don't even need to say that said, like full stop.
Yeah.
Amazing. I feel right now, like everybody would like to have answers, and everybody would like to have certainty, and everybody would like to know who they stand with or who they stand against.
Yeah.
And everybody wants to like get super granular with exactly what their personality type is and all the little things you do in that personality type. And that's cool and it's fun.
Okay, yeah.
But it is I really feel that it's like missing the point. So it's a spiritual tool that is steeped in mystery. You can't know all the answers. You can't know all the things. And I think it's meant to be this way, this system that shows you, like I think Suzanne used to say, this shows you the cage you're already in. Like, people don't put me in a box. I'm just showing you the box you're already in. So I feel like we're all in a box of personality that maybe we can't see necessarily. Like maybe we can't see the bars of our cage. And I think the Enneagram is like, oh, look, this is what the bars of your cage look like.
Yeah.
Here they are.
Yeah.
And the work is to melt them. And like my work is not to be such a 4. My work is to be nothing. Like to be all of them.
Yeah.
To be, the whole 1 through 9, the whole circle, the whole Enneagram is what my goal is, or what our goal is supposed to be. So So I'm almost like, I feel a little dissociative right now with it. Like I feel like it's foundational for me. But right now I'm in this place where I just want to like dissolve myself.
Well, and I think it's fair to just let the listeners know that like you, not only are you using this for yourself, you've also like, you have a podcast and you've done some like teaching and hosting of things around this. Like you've done facilitating. I mean, not that it was your job, but that it was
something I just wanted, community building, and just wanted to be of service.
Yeah, and you're active around it. And so I think this like kind of catch or tension in, you know, how you're presenting it and how you're hoping people might work with it versus how kind of the culture has taken it over these last several years.
Yeah.
It really tends to muddy the waters in a lot of way that like, and I have a lot of feelings around this idea too, but there's this piece of like, if I'm doing it, what am I doing with it? You know, if I'm being active and being of service with it, how is it being received? How am I sharing it? There's a lot that goes into that. So tell me, how did you get into the Enneagram? Like, what was your first encounter with it?
My first encounter with it was reading Rizzo and Hudson when I was 18. And I read the chapter on 4. Like my mother, who's a social 7, gave me the chapter on 4. She just like handed it to me.
Here you go, babe.
And I read it, and I was saying to you before that it felt like a diagnosis and it felt like a relief. And I think that in growing up in Mississippi, in many ways I felt like a stranger, and this kind of showed me why.
Yeah.
And you know, for better and for worse, like it kind of made me feel better about this space that I was standing in that was not where I felt like I was kind of by myself. But then it maybe pointed to like, oh, hey, your work is to like learn how to not be a stranger anywhere you are, you know, and not be attached to that concept. Like I think it'd be really easy to be like super attached to how quote different I am from the culture I grew up in, which is not really ultimately that important, you know. It just doesn't matter.
Like okay.
I mean, I just think it's something you can use to identify yourself, and that attachment can not be healthy, maybe.
Yeah, there's like this fine line between using it as like a guidebook or using it as a tool versus using it as something that's really static.
Yeah,
like when you
the Enneagram, you mean?
The Enneagram, and when we see our types, I think it's so important to like have that that underlying foundational understanding that like this is dynamic.
Yes.
That like, and there are ways in which you like that doesn't necessarily mean that we're going to be able to like completely get rid of our types or kill the ego or what have you. But
but we can try.
Well,
we know the journey we're in.
It's not even like for me, it's not so much like a trying in that space, but that like there's an allowing for change and like a natural development that is easier and sometimes faster with this tool. I mean, because you think about like for however long people have grown and developed in certain ways, regardless of whether they had tools or not.
Right.
Like there's a part of life that just kind of forces you to.
Yeah.
But then this tool allows you to engage in it so much more like consciously. And like what I hear you saying is that like there's this space where like at first it was nice to have that kind of framework and that
see the bars of your case.
Yeah, exactly.
Like,
to
there
see
they
it.
are, and that's what they look like.
Yeah. And I'm like, okay, it makes sense. Like there's something about it that's very, I think can be really comforting.
Sure.
That like, oh, this resonates with me so deeply. And because I'm only one of 9 different types around a circle, I'm not going to vibe with exactly how everyone else sees the world.
Right.
But then you're talking about how then there's been this kind of shift where it's like, I don't want these to be the bars anymore. I don't want, while it was comforting for a time, I don't want to continue identifying so strongly with these patterns and with, you know, the bars, so to speak.
Yes.
And I think that that's a really often missed piece of like Enneagram work. It would be so easy to just be like, oh, here I am. And there's a surprising amount of power in that in and of itself, right?
Yeah.
But there's this like a whole journey that you can go on if you're willing to let the like understanding of your type just be the first step.
Yes. 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 I think probably for a 4, it feels, because we want to be known, it feels very comforting to like really dig into the knowing of yourself. You know, and you're like, oh, all the little gradations of my little issues, you know, and that feels so kind of juicy and delicious. But then again, it's like, well, but that's also an attachment, and it's like, how can I just release it a little bit? Just hold it lightly, laugh at it, maybe. You know,
that is key for anything in the Enneagram. Like for anyone listening, if you can't laugh at yourself, you're gonna have a really hard time with this tool.
Yeah. I mean, because it's withering. I mean, really, it's quite withering. And to really see yourself in those moments where you're still acting out all your stuff, and to see it, it's withering to realize that you're just doing that. And but if you can laugh at that, or just observe it and go, oh, there I go again.
There I go again.
There I go again. It's helpful.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, you know, we've talked a little bit about, you know, your spirituality and this kind of journey from this very like entrenched kind of water you swim in vibe with Christianity. What was it? I mean, what took you out of that, away from that, to where you are now? What did that look like? I mean, even if just in broad strokes.
Broad strokes. Let's see. I mean, I think that I realized I was like still going to church, and I was taking my children to church, and that felt really important. And I felt like I was doing gymnastics to fit everything into some kind of making sense box inside myself. Yeah. And then I just got tired of doing that. And I just let it all go. And I didn't even really need to have an answer for it. I just let it go. Yeah. And I let it go with my children. I let it go with everybody. And I just kind of tried to listen to myself and pay attention. And I'm always like reading about spirituality. Yeah. I'm always reading things, and I started meditating a few years ago, and I do that every day. And I think that's been like really helpful, like I was saying, to just see, to realize how much I'm thinking and feeling, and that I can drop below that. I'm trying to think what else I want to say about that. I mean, I think like, can we talk about
well, we can talk about anything. Yeah, we can talk about anything.
Okay.
Yeah, like wherever you want to go, we can go.
Okay. I mean, I think that like hallucinogenics have been a part of this for me, like mushrooms and ayahuasca. Yeah. And I mean, I also feel like, again, I feel similarly the way I do about the way Enneagram is used. I feel similarly about that whole. Yeah. Like, so I don't want to be, I don't want to be one of those people. Yeah. That's like, oh, you know, I'm on this trip, you know, and I'm not, I really feel very careful about that. Yeah. So, and also I'm sober. So, I think my sobriety is probably what led me into trying mushrooms and ayahuasca, because of all the things I was listening to about how helpful it was for addicts and depression and anxiety. Yeah. And so I was just curious, and I feel like that really made me feel like it's one thing to like meditate and think about like Buddhist principles about like not being the center of consciousness. And it's another thing to like have your body experience that directly, to almost leave your entire self behind and drop somewhere. Yeah. I don't know how to describe that somewhere where you're like intimately held by what for me felt like a female presence, and laughed at.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, many things came up for me in those experiences about like one thing was that everything is ceremony was something that kept being said to me. And another thing that kept being said to me was that belonging is not only visual. And I thought that was super interesting because I think I'm a little hyper visual. And I think our culture is kind of hyper visual. So I've been thinking a lot about like, what does it feel to belong and not have any identity around that? What else do I want to say? That I don't need to protect myself is something that keeps coming up. That my heart needs to not be, that I don't need to protect it. That there's nothing to protect it against.
Yeah.
Which feels kind of wild.
Yeah.
But I think it's true. So I think that even though I've always been on this journey since I've been a little girl.
Yeah.
Those technologies, if we want to call them that, or plant medicine, whatever you want to call it.
Yeah.
Those, just like the Enneagram, I would say, it's just a tool that helped.
Yeah. Well, and I definitely get the vibe around like how our culture tends to use these sorts of things, like
the way we're talking about all that right now.
Yeah, like quick fixes and let's microdose so we can be better at our jobs.
Exactly.
And it's kind of like, I think we're missing the point.
Yes.
Where, you use the term plant medicine, like there's for many of these things, there is a very like deep history of how different cultures have worked with these things.
Yes.
And it's not a
microdose.
Well, it's not a microdose, and it's not a recreational activity.
Yeah.
It is it's something designed, like it's medicine. It's something designed to bring healing over time, like it's not just, ooh, yeah, that was fun.
Yes. And I feel very strongly about that. I'm like I said, I'm sober. And so I had some trepidation about even trying this medicine, but also it became very clear to me very early on that for me, it had to be in ceremony. It had to be intentional.
Yeah.
It had to be set up as ceremony. It could never be social.
Yeah.
And also it is very important to me that I am never using anything, whether it's plant medicine or food or Netflix, or even my feeling loops.
Yeah.
To try to put me to take me out of reality. So I think one of the crazy things about being sober is that everything that comes your way, every discomfort, every anxiety, every moment where I feel like I want to stop or I want to get off this, I just have to be with that.
Yeah.
I just have to deal with it. I have to go like, look at this feet. Look at this. This is happening. And I don't,
this is happening.
Right. So like to me, for me, being unsober would be to try to do something to soften that.
Yeah. Take the edge off.
Take the edge off reality.
Yeah.
Like how are you dealing with reality? How are you trying to take the edges off reality? And I'm not saying, I think we all try to take the edges off reality. So I'm not saying I'm like over here not taking any edges off.
Absolutely.
But I'm just paying attention to our tendency as humans, I think, to try to do that. And I actually think it's super interesting.
Yeah, it's fascinating.
It's fascinating because we say we're on this spiritual journey and we say we're here for like the grit and the entire catastrophe of it.
Yeah.
But then we're like, look at all the ways we're avoiding it.
Yeah.
And I want to try to not do that.
Yeah. So would you be willing to share more about your journey with sobriety and like what that's looked like for you?
Sure. Let's see. I quit drinking. I was a wino, basically.
What is it? The wine mom thing? Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
It's so pervasive.
I mean, I kind of got sober. I got sober in 2010. So I sort of feel in some ways like I missed that whole
good
rosé mom thing. But when I see it, when I see it advertised as something that we should aspire to, or even a blanket of like, again, of softening reality so that we can
function
as mothers.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't want to not be compassionate towards any woman or any mother, because it's the hardest thing there is to do. And you just try to do it. But I also think that there's something deeply honoring in being, like, I like saying I'm here for the entire catastrophe of it.
Yeah.
Like, to be present
Mm-hmm.
to the suffering of it, the awkwardness of it, the mundanity of it is a blessing.
Yeah.
I mean, and I definitely was medicating myself with wine. And it was a moment where I'd been at a party. I landed in bed at 5 p.m. and my husband was bathing the children, and there were like these warm little bodies crawling all over me, and I was feeling sick, and I kept getting up to throw up. And one of those times, my little tiny son, he was 8, and naked and warm, and at the end of the bed with his little eyes just looked at me, and he was like, "Mommy, where are you?" Because I was going to throw up, and he was like, "Mommy, where are you go?" Oh. He just stopped and was like, "Oh." And that minute, I was like,
no more.
I was like, I am not that mother.
Yeah.
I do not want this little child normalizing that.
Yeah.
So Nathaniel came back in the room, and I said, "I think I'm an alcoholic." And he's like, "I think you are too." And we went to a meeting that night together.
Awesome.
And then I worked the whole program.
Yeah.
And I don't so much anymore, but I do feel like having the Enneagram is like it is a spiritual program.
Yeah.
And so I'm really grateful for it in that regard. And
I mean, not to totally take us down this rabbit hole, but I feel like it's really important for me to just highlight that, like, when we look at motherhood and this kind of like wine mom thing, it's like, to some extent, it's the hardest thing that there is. And however you have to get by, you have to get by. And I, like you said, I want to hold a lot of compassion and space for that.
Absolutely.
And I think what this trend and this fact that you have to do what you can to get by is really highlighting how we as a society have failed mothers. Like, yes, it's the hardest thing, but we have made it so much harder. And I don't necessarily want to take a whole lot of time to like unpack that, except for, the root is capitalism, white supremacy, and patriarchy. We don't like, we can just put a pin in that and move on.
It's hard to move on from this. But yes.
But I want to just like hold that, like, there is if somebody's listening.
And honestly, like, and not in a pat way, but I feel that that's where spirituality can get in the middle of all those isms, all the systems that we have normalized are those are other
those
bars.
Are new bars. Yeah.
Those are other bars that we may or may not see.
Yeah.
And how do we dissolve their power in our own lives and in the lives of people we love? And that is an ongoing and massive
and I just want to highlight in this that, like, if you are a mom and you are struggling with these things, it is not a personal failure. Like, it's a societal failure, it is a cultural failure, and there is help and support if you want to do something differently. You said that night you went to a meeting, like, there are places you can go where you can get that kind of support. Just for people who are listening, I know a lot of moms listen to this podcast, and just like,
well, I think the best thing to do, for me, was to find like-minded mothers who could laugh at how hard it was, or could laugh at failure. Failure is a springboard for the imagination. It's like, it's a good thing.
Yeah.
Even if it doesn't always feel like it. And so I think it's crucial to find mothers who make you feel whole and are not, who have maybe, just opted out of the isms.
Yeah. Yeah.
Opted out of like what, caring what it looks like as a mother, caring what their children
expectations
look like.
and
That also is part of spirituality. That's another layer of letting go of how, because that's a self-concept, right? So I think so much of our suffering comes from self-concepts. And so
yeah.
I think it's really important to find other mothers who support you in being just a beloved creature.
Yeah.
Not a lunchbox maker and a soccer mom or whatever,
A taxi driver and a maid and a housekeeper and a laundry doer and all those things that
sex
just
worker.
Yeah, right.
Maybe
that's like
that's not. Maybe I shouldn't say that.
I'm sure plenty of people feel that way. Like, yeah. Yeah. So, I think we're bringing up something really interesting about like, we're kind of dancing around it, but there's like a communal aspect to spirituality that you're kind of like hinting on.
I think I'm not even hinting. Like, I think it's really important. And I think also as a 4, that can get lost. So I think a 4 can be really comfortable in contemplative space. A 4 can get
absolutely.
really comfortable being sort of in love with their own feelings, right? And so... So, I think it's really important to figure out how to, in the midst of like, learning to kind of unspecialize yourself or see yourself in connection with all creatures. Also, what does that connection look like? And so how do you get out of your heart and into your body?
How do you live it?
How do you live it? And so there's lots of ways to do that. I think, like, for example, people like a woman who I don't know just came and lived with me. An 86-year-old woman came and lived with me last week for the week. And I didn't know her, but somebody on Instagram said she needed a place to live. And like, I feel like I'm always going to say yes to being inconvenienced in that way, because it's not an inconvenience.
Yeah.
Because it pulls me into the reality of community with this elderly woman. It makes my house a place that anyone can be in. My door is always open. There's a lot of people in and out of my house all the time. People who need help, people who just want to hang out.
Yeah.
Run all my own errands, like do all the things, like don't outsource gritty. Don't outsource your grit, because that's like, that's how you that's how you see yourself as like a person in the world that is connecting. I mean, honestly, most of my inspiration for my work comes from interacting with other people everywhere, because it's like, as I was saying earlier, everything is ceremony. And I feel like little altars everywhere, groups of people everywhere are just being altars for you.
Yeah.
And like, my job is to see it, So I don't know if I'm answering your question.
No, I mean, I don't know that there was a question at that point. We were just riffing.
But just community. I just think it's, I guess what I'm thinking about right now is I think it's really important to inconvenience yourself. And I think culturally that's another thing, is like, whether it's COVID or whether it's American culture or both, we kind of have gotten really used to just being on our own, and not a lot of people are working from home, and a lot of people are doing everything for themselves. And I think we have to sort of fight against that and find our ways back into public spaces, find our way back into sharing things.
Yeah. Well, and there's so much too, kind of baked into our culture that is so individualistic, and it is so focused on convenience.
Yes.
Like, so much of our culture is like on the like bedrock of convenience.
Yes.
And like we're both sitting here and we're white and we can operate in the world with a massive amount of convenience.
Yes.
And so this idea of like purposefully and intentionally inconveniencing yourself is, right, kind of the lived experience of, okay, how do we live something other than the isms and whatnot, like these struggles that are happening? It's like, oh, we have to inconvenience ourselves in order to see. Yeah, we have to allow ourselves to be uncomfortable, create space for ourselves to be uncomfortable, which kind of leads me to this next question around, like, not everybody has the capacity to be uncomfortable. And so I'm curious, like, what tools and practices you've used help you with that?
Well, I would say that fours maybe as a sexual four, I sort of get off on being uncomfortable.
I mean, as a sexual 8, I'm like, okay, yeah, I also like have that vibe for sure.
I mean, I do. And so I think it's important and so that becomes a huge thing, like back to the kind of like, you're not the center of consciousness thing. Like, how can you be, there's a space, say I'm at a dinner party, where I can say, I'm just a drop of water in this ocean of this reality that's in front of me, and I do not have to manage it or mess with it, and I do not have to like throw a bomb in it. I do not have to like make it sexier by saying some provocative thing.
Yeah.
I don't have to insert myself in any way. I mean, I need to be engaged with it. I'm not detaching from it, but I don't need to center myself in any way. And so I guess I used to probably confuse making things uncomfortable with authenticity or engagement.
Yeah.
And I'm trying to like
undo those
things and see the difference in inserting myself to just add juice unnecessarily.
Yeah.
And or a different place would be like this 86-year-old woman in my house. It's uncomfortable in a myriad of ways that I won't go into. But it's like that feels sacred.
Yeah. There's like a difference there's a discernment in, like, 'cause as an 8, like, I tend to relish things most people find very uncomfortable. And I've learned through my work that those things are not the things that I'm avoiding. Those aren't the things that actually make me feel uncomfortable, right?
Yes. It's a distraction.
Yeah, it's a distraction. It's like you were using the word juice. Like there's a kick there. Like I'm getting something from it.
Yeah.
Where
another addiction.
Exactly. Absolutely. Where I'm looking at like, okay, the things that actually make me uncomfortable, right? Like, how do I create capacity to move into those? Not just the things on the outside are hard.
There's like low-hanging fruit discomfort.
Yeah, or it's it's the discomfort that I'm comfortable with.
The discomfort that you're comfortable
right?
with.
That
That's
like
fantastic.
the pushing and the forcing and the, the fighting. Like other people find that wildly uncomfortable and would never do it. But like, this is the way that I work. This is the way that I operate in the world.
Yeah.
What is actually more uncomfortable in a deep and true way for me is like, okay, what if I showed up and like shared how I was impacted by something?
Yeah.
What if I showed up and like shared my feelings about something? Like, what if I allowed myself to be in that space and be...
What if you're like wrong about something you're talking about and someone tells you you're wrong in front of a bunch of people and you manage to find a lot of space and grace for that? Yeah. Like that kind of stuff.
Yeah, exactly. Like the real stuff in the moment that's happening. It's like that takes a different kind of capacity. And you've mentioned like your meditation practice, but I'm curious, like, what are the things that have allowed you to embrace these truly and deeply uncomfortable things in your life?
I mean, I think it's this like letting go of my self-concept, and realizing that I'm going to be dead one day and then I'm just here. Yeah. I'm not just here playing, but like one of the things I think like it feels like a strange balance between realizing, and I think this is important for fours, is that, and I asked my friend before my show was opening, I was like, what can I do to help? And I'm like, you can pray that I realize how very unspecial I am. and also how very special I am. And
Yeah.
for fours, that's a real tension at all times. And all of our misbehavior, I think, comes from a distortion of those two poles of specialness.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
we either are swimming in shame and find ourselves super unspecial,
Yeah.
and we kind of overdo that and
Yeah.
overattach to it and actually recenter ourselves in that shame
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
in that unspecialness, which is really inappropriate and not helpful. Or we're at rather either secretly or overtly, depending on maybe your
Yeah.
subtype, really seeing, like, really insisting on all
Yeah.
the ways in which you're special.
Mm-hmm.
And so what is my point? What is my point? My point is that in just observing that, and the only way I've been able to observe that is through meditation, I think.
Yeah. Yeah.
Allows me to just like see it just for this little dance that it is, and realize that that is not actually me. It's just the energy that I'm grabbing or not grabbing. And so I can choose to not grab it.
Yeah.
And I think the trick for me there is like the more work I do there, it might be easy to just say, oh, well, then I don't need to do anything. I'm just going to sit here and be a monk, right? And be very like despecialized and very like,
Yeah.
But I think when I kind of got to a place when I was on ayahuasca, and I felt this very, like, as I said, feminine presence saying, oh, no, you go play in that unspecialness. And so it feels like I feel like the capacity to even play is a hard place to get to. Maybe not for everyone, but
Sevens.
but for me, like to truly play is serious work.
Yeah.
And I feel that that's so somehow it's like seeing how unattached you can be from your self-concept, and in that unattachment, the freedom that gives you allows you to play. And so is that
Totally.
Okay.
That's awesome. And I feel like this is a great time to kind of segue a little bit and talk about your work, because you're an artist, and I'm sure lots of fours listening will find that very exciting. But I'm curious to know more about it, what you do, what you're interested in, what what's the drive behind it? You have a big show in Austin right now, like to give us the download.
Yeah. So I have a show that's open right now through March 7th at Women in Their Work in Austin. And it's a forest that I've been working in for 2.5 years. And it is the forest of Artemis. And the myth of that is that a hunter came upon her bathing in the forest, and she saw him see her, and she turned him into a stag. Yeah. And then he was killed by his own dogs, or some tellings, she shot him through arrows. So I started seeing that as kind of a fable about what I was talking about earlier, about like longing for God. Like even the hunter approaching this sacred forest and this God of wildness, even the approach is not real, if that makes sense. Like I sort of see it as a fable about all of humanity approaching divinity and feeling or approaching wildness or approaching nature and feeling like it's something they can own, fix, exploit, create power systems out of. And so I feel like her composting him is not about the fact that she killed him. It's like the ultimate reminder of oneness. And so I started calling her the gaze destroyer, and that there is no separation, that she's this huge wild reminder of that. And so in that story, I was just playing with this whole thing that I've been talking to you about, which is that there is no separation, and there is no center of consciousness, and we are in this big web of wildness, and every rock and tree is sacred. And so what ended up happening is like my process actually followed those ideas, where I would say paint Artemis as a 24-year-old, and then I would obliterate that painting and paint over it. I'd paint her as a 6-year-old because I've known her whole life. And then I'd paint her as a 10-year-old, and a 12-year-old, and an 18-year-old. And I just kept obliterating and obliterating and obliterating. And while I was doing all that, I kept photographing all these different iterations of the painting and all the spaces in between where she was kind of messed up or unresolved or awkward. And then I would record that on my camera, and then I ran it all together and made this video of her becoming herself, and then kind of unbecoming herself, and then becoming herself again.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
And so then I realized I'm like playing with these in-between spaces and these paintings that are not really paintings, or these things that are like, I'm trying to take the object out of art, and like, how can I be immersed in my process, and how can you as the viewer come into the show and feel like you're in the middle of that becoming as well, and like, how can your presence change what that becoming is?
Yeah.
So it's like I've been very steeped in this.
Yeah. It sounds like
to
it.
the point where I'm probably a little weird. But anyway.
Hey, that's playing into the fourness. It all works out. Yeah. Good stuff. Good stuff. Oh, that's awesome.
Totally.
Where can people find out more about your work?
So I have a website that's Elizabeth Chapin.
Okay.
I have an Instagram that's Elizabeth Chapin. You can look at Women in Their Works website, and I have a podcast called Austin Enneagram.
Yeah, because we're here in Austin.
Yes. And I've kind of been on a hiatus. I was telling you that my dad died in July, and I have not been able to pick it up again, and I don't know what that's about. Yeah, but
it's probably about grief, but you know, that's a whole thing for a short flippant answer.
Yeah. And my last podcast was about nines, and he was a nine. And so I think, I don't know. I'm just trying to.
Yeah.
I think between my father's death and what I was talking to you earlier about just the granularity of Enneagram and wanting it to be more of a, a dissolution of type. Like, how can we lose our personality and gain ourselves? Is what I want to focus on, but I can't manage that. So I just have to find where I can be of service in that. It'll work itself out.
Yeah. Well, is there anything else that you'd like to share with the listeners, the audience, while you're here? You've already shared so much, so I'm deeply grateful, and I want to leave some space if you've got other things you want to share or say.
I brought these little things that
I saw these notes. I was like, when are we going to get into the notes?
I know, but I didn't say. This one I've kind of said over and over again. It's like, there is no center of consciousness. There is no necessity of representing the self in the midst of experience. I have that on my studio wall because I find that freeing. Yeah. I find it utterly freeing.
That's amazing.
When this is a Carrie Mae Weems quote, which is, within seriousness, there is little room for play, but within play, there is tremendous room for seriousness. And I love that because she's an artist, and I feel like that's a reminder to not take myself too seriously and to not take my work too seriously. Yeah. And then one thing I love, I think for all fours, and maybe for all withdrawing types, are Saul LeWitt's Letters to Ava Hess. Okay. And I'll just, this is one little postcard I have, but there are many, many letters he wrote to Ava Hess, and they were just words of encouragement for her. And I have this on my medicine cabinet. It's like, don't worry about cool. Make your own uncool. Make your own world. If you fear, make it work for you. Draw, paint your fear, paint your anxiety, and stop worrying about big, deep things, such as to decide on a purpose and way of life, a consistent approach to even some impossible end or even an imagined end. You must practice being stupid, dumb, unthinking, empty. Then you will be able to do. So it's freeing, also freeing. I think the Saul LeWitt and the there is no center, like there is no need to represent yourself in the midst of experience. Like it's kind of the same thing. It's like just this radical letting go of yourself. Yeah. And then in the letting go, like this taking up the responsibility of not needing to be that self. And what is that
Yeah.
playful expression
Yeah.
look like?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I love it. Well, Elizabeth, thank you so much for sharing all of this
you
like
for all
incredible
you do.
journey. And yeah, I'm super grateful. For all of y'all watching online, you can check out the links to all of Elizabeth's work down in the comments below. Be sure to drop a comment, share how you're feeling, the standard like, share, comment, subscribe, all that good stuff. If you're listening to the podcast on the audio version, be sure to leave us a rating and a review, and check out Elizabeth's work. So until the next time, we'll see you in the next one.